I used to think that love was a quiet thing, a gentle force that you carried with you like an old, familiar sweater, worn, comforting, and perhaps overlooked in the best possible way. Robert and I had been married for 10 years. It felt like a milestone of sorts. We had a beautiful life, something friends often commented on as enviable. They'd tell me how lucky I was, how lucky we were. At first, I believed them with all my heart. Robert was, for many years, my entire world. We met fresh out of college, both hungry to carve our own paths. He was charming, ambitious, and when he turned his attention on me I felt seen, truly seen. I devoted myself to him. I suppose I fell into the role of the perfect wife. And for a while, it felt fulfilling. One evening, a change came like a whisper. Robert had been working late more often, taking extra business trips, acting distracted, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. I dismissed it at first. Perhaps he was stressed, his job had grown more demanding recently. I was willing to understand. But that night, as he dozed off beside me, his phone lit up with a soft chime. It was innocuous enough a notification, but the name on the screen wasn't one I recognized. A part of me felt shame as I picked up his phone. Yet another part of me felt compelled, as though my instincts were guiding my hand. Scrolling through the messages, it became painfully clear. Robert was involved with someone else, someone who made him laugh, who he texted sweet nothings, the kind he hadn't sent me in years. As the messages revealed more than I was ready to see, I felt my world beginning to shatter. Piece by piece, I decided that night that I wouldn't confront him immediately. Instead, I would wait. After all, wasn't it fair that he should experience even a fraction of the betrayal and deception he put me through? I thought back to all those nights, dinners, and shared memories that felt sacred but were tarnished now by his lies. Over the next few days, I became a quiet observer. I gathered more details, piecing together his plans and hers, their clandestine meetups, and even saved screenshots of conversations that I knew I'd eventually need. My heart was heavy, but strangely enough, it felt like I was moving with a newfound purpose. The idea came to me suddenly, in one of those surreal moments where clarity strikes you like a cold splash of water. Our 10th wedding anniversary was approaching, and we talked about throwing a celebration, a kind of renewal of vows. How fitting, I thought. Yes, this would be the perfect opportunity for my surprise. The perfect stage. I began preparing for the event, sending invitations to our family and closest friends, planning as if everything were normal. I became a performer, playing the role of a wife in love, a woman oblivious to the storm brewing around her. It felt strangely empowering to keep the secret to myself, knowing that on this night, everything would change. The morning of the event, I woke up early and went about the day with a sense of serenity I hadn't felt in ages. I had carefully prepared a presentation for the reveal, gathering my evidence into a single, undeniable truth that I would share with everyone. When the guests arrived, the night took on a glow of its own. Family, friends, acquaintances, they all gathered, cheering, clapping, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and began to speak. My voice was calm, but the words themselves cut like knives. I unveiled everything, slowly, methodically, sparing no detail. I saw Robert's face shift from confusion to horror, but I barely glanced his way. This night wasn't for him, it was for me. As the shock settled, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't just free of him, I was free of the pretense, of the years spent living in someone else's shadow. Family members rushed to my side, offering their comfort and support. Some scolded Robert openly, while others offered silent sympathy, faces tight with sadness and understanding. Over the next few days, I was met with messages and phone calls, and while the pity was hard to bear, the solidarity reminded me that I was not alone. Yes, I had lost something, but perhaps what I'd gained was far more valuable, a strength I never knew I had. Now, as I look forward, I see possibility stretching out before me. I am stronger, wiser, and finally ready to build a life that is authentically my own. I had thought love was a quiet thing, but maybe, I realize now, it is something fierce, something that stands on its own 2 feet, and for the first time in years, I feel ready to stand alongside it. The days after the event felt surreal, like waking up from a dream you can't quite shake off. The house, once so full of memories, felt hollow. I couldn't bear to stay there any longer than necessary. Each room, each piece of furniture, even the patterns in the carpet felt tainted, like ghosts of a life I'd been forced to leave behind. But I was determined. I would not let this break me. I'd already spent too many years living on borrowed dreams, tied to someone who had betrayed every promise he'd ever made. So, I moved out, with just a few bags. I left behind the house that had once felt like a sanctuary and moved into a small but cozy apartment on the other side of town. It was a new space, a blank slate. At first, it was difficult. There were mornings I'd wake up expecting to see him beside me. Forgetting, even if only for a split second, the chasm of betrayal that now lay between us. The silence was new, uncomfortable, and deafening, but as the days passed, I began to find peace in the solitude. I filled the apartment with things that brought me joy, fresh flowers, vibrant paintings, books I'd been meaning to read for years. Slowly, it became mine, a home just for me. In those early months, I spent hours reflecting on who I was outside of the marriage. I'd poured so much of myself into being a good wife that I'd lost track of the person I used to be, the person I wanted to become. So I began making small changes. I joined a local art class, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time or courage for. The smell of paint, the rough texture of the canvas, the colors blending beneath my brush, it all felt like a form of therapy. A way to express everything I couldn't put into words. Through art, I found a voice I didn't know I had. My first paintings were dark, full of turbulent colors, jagged shapes, shadows. But over time, my brush strokes softened, brighter colors found their way onto the canvas. As I painted, I felt something within me begin to heal. I also started taking long walks every morning, letting the crisp air and the gentle sound of my footsteps ground me. These walks became my ritual, my meditation. I found myself observing the world with a renewed sense of wonder. I noticed the way the leaves changed color, the way the sun danced across the water, the subtle smiles exchanged by strangers on the street. It was as if I was seeing the world for the first time, free from the weight I'd carried for so long. One unexpected blessing from the whole ordeal was the way my friends and family rallied around me. I'd always been close to them, but there was a new level of understanding, a new depth in our relationships. Friends I hadn't seen in years reached out, offering their support. We shared stories, laughed, cried, and found strength in each other's company. I even reconnected with an old friend from college, Lisa, who had gone through a divorce herself a few years back. We'd drifted apart over the years, but now, we found ourselves drawn back together, bonded by shared experiences. Our coffee meetups became a cherished ritual. She'd offer advice, make me laugh, and, most importantly, remind me that I wasn't alone. Through these connections, I began to understand the value of community. For so long, I'd focused solely on my marriage, putting everything and everyone else on the back burner. But now, I realized that life was fuller, richer, and infinitely more beautiful when shared with others. As the months went by, I felt a growing sense of purpose. I'd gone through something painful, yes, but I wanted to turn that pain into something meaningful. I began volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering my time and a listening ear to those going through similar struggles. I heard stories that broke my heart but also inspired me beyond measure. One day, after sharing my story with a group of women at the shelter, one of them approached me with tears in her eyes. "You've given me hope," she said. Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after I'd left the shelter. I realized that my experience, my pain, could be a source of strength not just for myself, but for others as well. Inspired, I started writing, capturing my journey, my thoughts, my fears, and my growth in words. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for anyone who might find themselves in a similar place, searching for hope and healing. Writing became a lifeline, a way to make sense of everything I'd been through, and perhaps, in time, it would become a message of hope for others. A year passed. It was on the anniversary of the day I'd left that I found myself standing in front of my old house. I hadn't come back to see Robert, he was long gone, having moved on with his new life. I stood there to pay tribute to the life I'd once lived, to the dreams I'd once held. It was my way of saying goodbye, of closing a chapter with grace and gratitude. I smiled to myself, feeling lighter than I had in years. This wasn't a place of sadness anymore, it was a memory, a stepping stone, something that had helped shape me into the person I'd become. I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air, the quiet strength within me. As I walked away, I felt a sense of peace, of closure. I wasn't the same person who had once lived in that house, who had clung to a broken marriage. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone whole. I had reclaimed my life. And while I knew the road ahead would have its own challenges, I was no longer afraid. I'd learned that love isn't always a quiet, steady force. Sometimes, it's fierce, bold, and unapologetically wild, a love you find within yourself. A love that grows, that heals, that forgives. For the first time, I felt ready to live, to laugh, to love again, with a heart that had been broken but was now stronger than ever.